A stone city once floated on a lake. The Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan was an engineering marvel built upon a foundation that seems to defy all logic. By the end of this story, you will understand how an entire empire thrived on water and why its hidden genius still haunts us today. We will see how they forged farmland from a swamp and anchored pyramids with volcanic stone. Yet for all its glory, this city carried a fatal flaw. How did a civilization build a metropolis where one should not exist? And what secret did they know that we have forgotten? What does it truly mean for a city to be built on a dream? High in the mountains, a vast basin cradled a body of water known as Lake Texcoco. This was not a gentle, freshwater paradise. It was a sprawling, shallow lake with saline waters that shifted with the seasons, flooding expanses of land in the wet months and receding to leave behind crusted salt flats when the rains ceased. To any practical observer, this was a place of hardship, an unstable environment where building anything of permanence seemed like a fool's errand. Yet it was here, upon these challenging waters, that one of history's greatest urban experiments would begin. The story starts not with architects but with wanderers. A group of people later known as the Aztecs arrived in this valley after a long migration, searching for a sign. Their legends spoke of a prophecy, a divine instruction to settle where they saw an eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a snake. When they finally witnessed this omen on a small island in Lake Texcoco, they believed they had found their promised land. Archaeologists point out the staggering faith this decision required. They were choosing to build their future on a soggy island in a salty lake, surrounded by more powerful city-states already established on the stable mainland. It was a move that defied conventional logic, rooted in a spiritual certainty that this difficult place was their destined home. This belief transformed their perception of the landscape entirely. The unpredictable lake was no longer an obstacle. It was their greatest strategic asset. It provided natural defenses against rivals, and its very waters held the key to a new kind of agriculture. The unstable ground was not a weakness to be avoided, but a blank canvas awaiting their ingenuity. With a profound vision that merged deep faith with pragmatic brilliance, they looked at the impossible and decided to make it the foundation for everything. Their first and most brilliant act of creation was to make the earth itself. To feed a growing population on a small island, they needed farmland, but the lake offered only water and soft mud. So they invented an elegant solution that turned the lake's weakness into its greatest strength, the Chinampas. Often called floating gardens, this term is a little misleading. These were not simply rafts bobbing on the surface. They were permanent, fertile islands engineered from the lakebed up. The process was a masterclass in sustainable engineering. Workers would first stake out a long, rectangular plot in the shallow water using fences woven from flexible willow branches. This created a sturdy enclosure right on the lake bottom. Then they began a process of layering. They dredged up rich mud and nutrient-dense sediment from the lake floor and piled it inside the willow frame. They mixed in layers of decaying aquatic plants and other organic matter. This wasn't just dirt, it was a carefully composed living soil, charged with the nutrients needed for explosive plant growth. But the true genius was in the anchoring. At the corners of each Chinampa, they planted fast-growing willow trees called ahujotes. The roots of these trees would grow down through the layered soil, weaving through the willow fence and deep into the stable lakebed below, literally stitching the artificial island to the earth. The result was a stable, supremely fertile plot of land that never dried out. Canal waterways surrounded each Chinampa, allowing canoes to travel directly to the fields and providing constant moisture to the roots. This system created a microecology, The water regulated temperature, preventing frosts and allowing for something astonishing, up to 7 harvests a year from a single plot. Vegetables, flowers, maize, and beans flourished in these human-made plots. The Chinampas formed a vast green mosaic around Tenochtitlan, an agricultural powerhouse that could support an urban density unmatched anywhere in the world at that time. This was more than just farming, it was a profound dialogue with nature. They didn't drain the swamp, they collaborated with it, building fertile ground from water and muck through a deep understanding of hydrology and soil science. Modern urban farmers and sustainability researchers still study the Chinampa system today, seeing in it a blueprint for highly productive, ecologically integrated agriculture. It was the first and most vital layer of their floating city, proving that true stability doesn't always come from fighting your environment, but sometimes from learning how to grow from within it. But a city of soil and willow needed a skeleton of stone to build the temples, palaces, and plazas that would proclaim their power to the heavens. They required a material of immense strength and permanence. They found it in the very mountains that cradled their valley. The dark, dense volcanic rock known as basalt became the unyielding backbone of Tenochtitlan. This was not a casual choice. Basalt forms from rapidly cooling lava, creating a fine-grained stone that is incredibly tough and resistant to weathering. In an environment constantly challenged by water, this resistance to erosion was not just convenient, it was essential. A softer stone would have crumbled, but basalt could withstand the moisture and the weight of centuries. The most iconic form of this material was the basalt log, a columnar block quarried from the hillsides. These weren't small bricks. We are talking about multi-ton stone logs, some longer than a tall person and heavier than a modern car. And here we encounter one of the great, silent puzzles of this city's construction. How do you move 1,000 heavy stone logs from a distant quarry, across a rugged landscape, and onto a soggy island in the middle of a lake, all without the wheel, without metal tools beyond volcanic glass, and without draft animals like horses or oxen? The logistics are staggering to contemplate. Researchers believe the answer lies in a symphony of simple machines and monumental human effort. The journey likely began with levers and ropes, coaxing the massive logs onto a bed of rolling logs themselves. Teams would then pull the stone forward, constantly moving the rear logs to the front in a painstaking, caterpillar-like procession across the land. But the water posed a different challenge. Historians suggest that for the final leg of the journey, these basalt logs were loaded onto large, stable rafts. Imagine the scene, a flotilla of barges, each carrying a dark, volcanic spine for the growing city, being pulled slowly across Lake Texcoco along the very canals that fed the Chinampas. Once on the island, the stone found its purpose. For the grand temples like the Templo Mayor, basalt formed the core of the pyramid-stepped platforms. But its most critical role was hidden from view beneath the city's very streets. To anchor their heavier structures in the soft, waterlogged ground, Aztec engineers drove these basalt logs deep into the lakebed, creating sturdy pilings that could distribute the weight of a stone palace or a towering pyramid. This was genius in its practicality, a deep understanding that stability in a swamp doesn't come from fighting the softness, but from piercing through it to find a firm grip below. Every dark stone in Tenochtitlan, therefore, tells a dual story. It speaks of a people who read their landscape with the eyes of geologists, selecting the one material from their volcanic home that could defy water and time. And it whispers of an immense communal effort, of countless individuals coordinating to solve a physics problem of epic scale, moving mountains piece by piece to build a city where none should stand. Yet even the strongest stone needs a firm place to stand. Here lies the central engineering puzzle of Tenochtitlan. How do you convince a swamp to hold up a mountain of stone? The answer was not a single miracle material, but a brilliant, layered system, a foundation built with the patience of a master craftsman. It began where the city met the lakebed, in that soft, unstable zone of mud and water. Aztec engineers did not try to compact this muck or wish it away. Instead, they sent reinforcements deep into the earth. Using those formidable basalt logs, they created piles. Teams would drive the sharpened ends of these stone columns vertically down through the soft sediment, using their immense weight and likely a system of ropes and leverage, until they struck something solid, a denser, more compact layer of earth far below the surface. This was not guesswork. It was a deliberate act of probing, of seeking out hidden stability. Each pile became a deep-rooted tooth, anchoring the city to the very bones of the valley. But a single tooth cannot support a temple. The next step was to create unity from these individual points of strength. Across the grid of these sunken basalt piles, workers constructed a platform. They filled the spaces between the logs with a carefully selected mix of smaller stones, compacted rubble, and clay. This created a thick, rigid mat, a kind of artificial bedrock that sat above the unstable mud. The genius was in distribution. The weight of a massive pyramid, which would have caused it to sink unevenly into the soft ground, was now transferred down through this stone and rubble platform. The platform then spread that immense load out across the entire grid of deep pilings, which in turn channeled the force straight down into the firm layer they had found. It was a perfect diffusion of pressure, a lesson in managing forces that modern engineers would recognize instantly. This ancient piling system is a direct ancestor of the technology used to build skyscrapers on sandy soil or to preserve historic cities like Venice on their watery foundations. The Aztecs turned their greatest liability, the soft lakebed, into a managed variable. They understood that true stability often comes not from the surface you build on, but from the hidden connection you forge with what lies beneath. Their city did not float on water. It was meticulously stitched to the earth, with stone threads reaching into the darkness below. With a skeleton of stone firmly anchored below, the city above began to pulse with life. This life flowed through a network so essential it was the city's circulatory system, a vast and intricate web of canals. To call Tenochtitlan a city with canals is to miss the point entirely. It was a city of canals, an aquatic metropolis where water was the primary street. The layout was a masterstroke of urban planning, a precise grid of waterways that carved the island into orderly, navigable districts. This was not a haphazard collection of ditches, but a deliberate hydraulic blueprint, an American Venice engineered with a purpose for every channel. The most immediate function was transportation. In a culture that did not use the wheel for carts or wagons, the canoe was the universal vehicle. These sturdy, shallow draft vessels glided silently along the canals, carrying everything from baskets of ripe tomatoes harvested from the Chinampas to basalt logs for new construction. A farmer could load his harvest directly from his garden plot onto a canoe and paddle it straight to a bustling market plaza. This system was astonishingly efficient, moving people and goods with a fluid grace that land-based roads could not match in such an environment. But the canals were far more than aquatic highways. They served as the defining boundaries between neighborhoods known as calpuli, which were more than just city blocks. Each calpuli was a distinct social and professional unit, often home to artisans of a specific craft, like feather workers or potters. The canals physically and symbolically separated these communities while also connecting them to the whole. They functioned as critical drainage channels, constantly moving water to prevent the city from flooding or becoming a stagnant marsh. The engineering behind this flow was subtle and brilliant. The Aztecs managed a delicate hydrological balance, channeling freshwater from springs on the mainland into the city, while devising ways to limit the intrusion of saline water from the lake. They used causeways with carefully placed gaps and built dikes and aqueducts to control the mix, ensuring the water in their urban network remained as fresh and life-giving as possible. This integration was total. The canals linked the productive Chinampas to the residential Calpuli, which fed into the grand ceremonial centers. Commerce, sanitation, community, and spirituality all flowed together on these waterways. Modern urban planners look at Tenochtitlan's design with a sense of awe, seeing in it a precursor to the concept of a multifunctional, resilient city. It was a living system where infrastructure was not separate from daily life, but the very medium through which life happened. The quiet splash of a paddle, the reflection of whitewashed adobe houses in the still water, the gentle current carrying away the day. This was the rhythm of a city that had learned not just to live on the water, but to think and move with its flow. Yet this aquatic masterpiece could not exist in isolation. For Tenochtitlan to become the heart of an empire, it needed to reach out and connect. The solution was as bold as the city itself, a series of massive stone roads that reached across the water like the steady arms of a giant. These were the causeways, and they were far more than bridges. They were feats of landscape engineering that tamed the lake without conquering it, demonstrating a profound understanding that to control your environment, you must first respect its rhythms. The Spanish who later arrived were stunned by their scale, reporting that the widest of these roads could accommodate 10 horsemen riding side by side. Imagine a raised highway of packed earth and stone, broad and solid, stretching for miles across the shimmering surface of Lake Texcoco. It must have been an awe-inspiring sight, a straight line of human order drawn defiantly across the natural expanse of water. But the true genius of these causeways lay not in their impressive width, but in what was built into their very fabric. The Aztec engineers faced a critical problem. A solid wall of earth and stone blocking the lake would act as a dam, disrupting the delicate water circulation that kept their canals fresh and their Chinampas thriving. Stagnant water on one side could flood fields, while blocked currents on the other might alter the entire lake's ecology. Their brilliant answer was to build permeability into the structure. At strategic intervals, they left open gaps in the causeway, spanned by removable wooden bridges. These gaps served a dual purpose. In times of peace, they allowed the free flow of lake water and canoe traffic to pass underneath, maintaining the vital hydrological balance. In times of threat, the wooden planks could be quickly pulled up, transforming the causeway into a series of impassable moats, turning their lifeline into a formidable defensive barrier. Even more subtly, they incorporated culverts, stone-lined channels that ran right through the heart of the causeway itself, allowing water to circulate unseen beneath the road surface. This was engineering with foresight. It shows a holistic vision that modern city planners strive for, where infrastructure is designed as part of an ecosystem, not imposed upon it. The causeways did not sever the city from the lake. They became a new kind of organ within it, a conduit for people and goods that still allowed the lifeblood of water to flow. They connected the island to the mainland markets, armies, and tributary states, but they did so on terms that honored the aquatic world that gave the city life. In every stone of those raised roads, we see a principle that feels remarkably contemporary, the understanding that true connection requires not just strength, but intelligent adaptation. But a city of canals still thirsts. Tenochtitlan's greatest irony was its location, surrounded by a vast expanse of water that its people could not drink. Lake Texcoco's high salinity made its water bitter and useless for sustaining a large population. For a metropolis aspiring to be the center of an empire, this was not just an inconvenience, it was an existential threat. A community can survive many hardships, but it cannot survive without clean water. The Aztec engineers, having already mastered earth, stone, and flow, now faced their most vital challenge, bringing the essence of life itself across the lake. Their answer was a structure of such elegant practicality that it remains a textbook example of ancient civil engineering, the Aqueduct of Chapultepec. They looked to the western shore, to a forested hill whose name would become legendary, Chapultepec, meaning Hill of the Grasshopper. Here, freshwater springs bubbled from the ground, a precious source of pure water. The task was to capture this water and deliver it across more than 3 miles of open lake to the island city. They built not a simple pipe, but a raised, enclosed channel of mortar and stone, a literal river in the sky. It ran atop a sturdy dike that stretched from the mainland, a slender stone thread carrying life across the blue. The principle was gravity, the most reliable force they knew. By carefully grading the aqueduct's path, they ensured the water flowed steadily downward from the springs, across the lake, and directly into the heart of Tenochtitlan's distribution centers. Yet the true mark of their foresight was in the design. This was not a single channel, but a dual aqueduct, 2 parallel waterways running side by side. This was a stroke of maintenance genius in an age without heavy machinery. When one channel inevitably needed cleaning, repair, or seasonal upkeep, it could be taken out of service completely. The second channel would continue flowing uninterrupted, guaranteeing that the city's 200,000 residents never faced a day without fresh water. Think of the immense logistical pressure this relieved. There was no need for frantic, round-the-clock repairs. Maintenance could be scheduled, methodical, and thorough, because the city's lifeline was always protected by a backup. This dual system speaks to a sophisticated, almost modern, understanding of urban resilience. It was infrastructure designed with its own future in mind, built to endure not just the elements, but the inevitable need for its own care. The water that arrived in the city was then channeled into public fountains and cisterns, becoming the clear, drinkable reality of daily life. It filled clay jars in homes, supplied the bustling markets, and sustained the very population that made Tenochtitlan a rival to the great cities of Europe. In solving the paradox of a waterless water city, they demonstrated that the highest form of engineering is not about dominating nature, but about listening to it, finding its gifts, and then building a guaranteed path for those gifts to reach home. Even the most brilliant aquatic city is at the mercy of the sky. For all their canals and aqueducts, the people of Tenochtitlan lived with a looming, elemental danger. Their home was built on a lake that could rise with terrifying speed, fed by seasonal rains that poured down from the surrounding mountains. A single powerful storm could undo generations of work, flooding Chinampas, overwhelming canals, and threatening to dissolve the very ground their city stood upon. This was not a sporadic inconvenience, but a perpetual existential challenge. To survive here was to be in a constant, quiet battle against the water that gave them life. Their ultimate defense would become one of the ancient world's most ambitious feats of civil engineering. They conceived and constructed a colossal barrier, a dike stretching an almost unimaginable 16 kilometers across the lake. Known today as the Nezahualcoyotl Dike, it was named for the visionary ruler of the allied city of Texcoco, a man who was both a poet and an engineer. This was more than a wall, it was a landscape-scale instrument of environmental management. Built from earth, stone, and tightly woven reed mats, it functioned like a giant surgical tool, carefully partitioning the lake itself. Its primary purpose was to create a hydrological sanctuary. The dike separated the brackish, saltier waters of the eastern part of Lake Texcoco from the western basin where Tenochtitlan and its Chinampas flourished. By blocking the inflow of saline water, it preserved the freshwater environment crucial for their agriculture and drinking supply, but its role was dual in nature. During the violent tempests of the wet season, this massive earthwork stood as a bulwark against storm surges, absorbing the fury of the waves and shielding the city's vulnerable edges. It also served as a giant regulator, helping to maintain consistent water levels in the protected zone, preventing both catastrophic floods and parching droughts that could wither the floating gardens. The scale of the undertaking is difficult to overstate. Coordinating the labor and resources for a structure of that length required unprecedented political cooperation between Tenochtitlan and its allied city-states. It was a monumental public works project that declared a shared commitment to taming their volatile world. The dike stands as a testament not just to technical skill, but to sophisticated diplomacy and collective will. It represents one of the largest hydraulic engineering projects ever undertaken in the pre-Columbian Americas, a silent, earthen monument to the understanding that the greatest threats cannot be faced alone. In its long, steady presence, we see a civilization refusing to be passive victims of their environment. They studied the lake's moods, predicted its rages, and then bent their collective genius to gently persuading the water to behave. They didn't seek to defeat the lake, but to negotiate a lasting peace with it, building a barrier that was, in essence, a treaty written in stone and soil. At the precise center of this aquatic marvel rose its spiritual and physical anchor, the Templo Mayor. This was not merely a temple, it was the axis of the Aztec universe, a towering twin pyramid dedicated to the gods of rain and war. And it presented the ultimate engineering paradox. How do you build a mountain on a swamp? The answer lies buried beneath its grand staircases, a hidden masterpiece of foundational genius. When archaeologists carefully excavated the site, they uncovered not a simple slab of stone, but a deeply engineered artificial landscape. The temple's core is a dense, complex matrix, a hybrid material created by human intention. It begins with those trusted basalt logs, driven vertically into the soft ground like mighty teeth, creating a forest of stone pilings. The spaces between these logs were then packed with a carefully selected mix of compacted rubble, volcanic gravel, and clay. This was not random fill, it was a designed composite, a man-made conglomerate that interlocks to distribute weight and resist shifting. But the story gets more profound with each layer of history. The Templo Mayor was not built once. It was enlarged 7 distinct times over 2 centuries, each new king adding a larger, more magnificent shell over the existing structure. This ritual of encapsulation was a political and spiritual act, but it also had a brilliant engineering consequence. Each new phase did not replace the old, it entombed it. The previous pyramid became the stable, compacted core for the next. Over generations, this process created a deeply anchored, artificial hill within the island, a solid mass of interlocked stone and earth that grew wider and more rooted with every passing rain. Think of it like the rings of a tree, each layer adding strength and girth to the whole. The weight of the entire structure, therefore, was not bearing down on a single point on the lakebed. It was diffused across this vast, engineered foundation, and then channeled down through the grid of basalt piles into the firm earth far below. The temple's breathtaking stability was a living advertisement of Aztec power. It was a divine statement carved in stone, proving that their will could literally reshape the most unstable earth into a platform for the gods. To stand before the Templo Mayor was to witness a civilization that had mastered the art of transformation, turning the inherent weakness of their watery world into a display of unshakable strength. In its layered heart, we see their entire philosophy made solid, a testament to the idea that true permanence is not found but built, one intelligent layer at a time. The city they witnessed seemed to defy the very order of the world. When Hernán Cortés and his soldiers crested the mountains and looked down into the Valley of Mexico in the year 1519, they were met with a sight that shattered their expectations. Veteran chronicler Bernal Díaz del Castillo struggled to find words, finally comparing it to the enchanted cities from the fantastical tales of chivalry popular in Europe. It was, he wrote, like something out of a dream. Before them lay a vision of impossible order, a glittering metropolis of whitewashed adobe and stone temples, all seemingly suspended upon the vast, shimmering plain of the lake. Canoes moved like water beetles along a precise grid of canals, and the great causeways stretched out like stone rulers laid across the water. This was not a collection of huts, it was a city more populous, more meticulously planned, and in many ways more cleanly engineered than any they had left behind in Spain. Their written accounts filled with this stunned awe are priceless. They provide the only first-hand, written snapshots of Tenochtitlan in its full, functioning glory. Diaz meticulously describes the bustling markets, the efficient canal traffic, and the overwhelming scale, offering us a window into the daily rhythm of a living system. Yet within that awe lay a profound and ultimately catastrophic blindness. The conquistadors saw the effect, the glorious city on the water, but they completely failed to comprehend the cause, the brilliant, layered negotiation with the unstable earth that made it all possible. To their European minds, land was solid and water was separate. They saw a city built on a lake, not a city built with a lake. They admired the stonework of the temples but gave little thought to the hidden forest of basalt logs beneath them. They marched their armored columns down the wide causeways, never considering the delicate culverts and water gaps that maintained the lake's health beneath their feet. This fundamental misunderstanding of the city's symbiotic relationship with its environment was a kind of intellectual arrogance. They saw a conquest of nature where the Aztecs had achieved a collaboration with it. This failure to grasp the underlying engineering logic meant that when Spanish rule began, they made decisions based on a flawed premise. They viewed the lake not as the city's lifeblood and foundation, but as a problem to be solved, an obstacle to a more familiar, land-based style of urban life. In their awe-struck descriptions, we have a vital record of the city's beauty, but in their ignorance of its hidden genius, we can already see the seeds of its unraveling, a fate that began not with destruction, but with a simple failure to understand what they were truly looking at. A city of 200,000 souls cannot simply discard what it leaves behind. Every meal, every harvest, every human life produced a constant stream of organic material that in a less thoughtful city would have festered, polluted, and bred illness. But in Tenochtitlan, nothing was considered truly waste. The entire metropolis functioned with the elegant efficiency of a living organism, its byproducts constantly recycled to fuel its own growth. This ancient model of urban metabolism began with the most basic human function. Human waste was not flushed into the lake, where it would have poisoned the very water they relied upon. Instead, researchers believe it was systematically collected. While the exact methods are debated, the likely destination reveals a profound ecological logic. After a period of composting or drying to neutralize pathogens, this material, rich in nitrogen and phosphorus, would have been transported by canoe back to the Chinampas. There, it was carefully integrated as a potent fertilizer, completing a vital nutrient loop. The food grown in the floating gardens nourished the people, and what the people returned was used to nourish the gardens once more. This transformed a potential source of disease and pollution into the very engine of agricultural abundance, but the system extended far beyond this. Organic refuse from markets and homes, like food scraps and plant matter, was also gathered and composted. Canoes designated for collection would move through the canal network like silent, aquatic sanitation vehicles, carrying this material away from residential areas to designated composting grounds. The canals themselves, constantly fed by freshwater from the aqueduct, had a gentle flow that helped carry away silt and debris, preventing stagnation. This was not a haphazard process, but a routine, integrated part of the city's daily rhythm. The result was a nearly closed-loop ecosystem. Waste was not an endpoint, but a transition point in a continuous cycle of renewal. It was a practical philosophy that viewed every output as a potential input elsewhere in the system. Modern megacities, grappling with mountains of landfill waste and polluted waterways, are only now beginning to seriously invest in circular economy principles that the Aztecs practiced as a matter of necessity and wisdom. Their approach reveals a fundamental understanding often lost in our age of disposal, that true sustainability is not just about managing what we take from the environment, but about thoughtfully reintegrating everything we give back into it. In Tenochtitlan, nothing was truly discarded. It was merely awaiting its next purpose. All that meticulous engineering served a single, vital purpose: to fuel a beating economic heart. At the center of this aquatic trade network lay the great market of Tlatelolco, the commercial engine of the empire. This was not a simple gathering of stalls, but a sprawling, hyper-organized marketplace that astonished the Spanish with its scale and discipline. Contemporary accounts suggest it drew up to 60,000 visitors on a single day, a number that rivals the population of major European cities of that era. Imagine the constant hum of voices, the splash of arriving canoes, and the vibrant colors of goods from across the known world, all contained within a single, orderly district. Its location was no accident. Tlatelolco sat adjacent to Tenochtitlan, connected by wide causeways and a web of canals, making it the perfect nexus for trade. The entire design of the floating city funneled commerce directly to its gates. A farmer from the southern Chinampas could load his canoe with avocados and tomatoes at dawn, and by gliding along the serene waterways, arrive at the market before the morning crowds, his produce still fresh with dew. A merchant from the distant Gulf Coast, having traveled by larger canoe across the lake, could dock at a dedicated wharf and unload exotic goods like cacao beans, jade, and brightly colored parrot feathers without ever needing a cart or a pack animal. This seamless connection between transportation and commerce was the market's superpower. Every stall, every section was essentially waterfront property. The canals were its loading docks, its highways, and its supply lines all in one. The Spanish chronicler Bernal Díaz del Castillo struggled to describe the abundance, noting there were sections for gold and silver, for precious stones and feathers, for embroidered cloth and animal skins. There were streets for pottery, for timber, for herbs, and for every kind of food imaginable, from maize and beans to turkeys, rabbits, and even prepared foods like tamales and stews. What impressed the Europeans most, however, was not the variety but the order. Market officials patrolled the aisles, settling disputes on the spot and ensuring fair measures. A separate court sat in session right within the market to handle more serious grievances. This created an environment of trust essential for such high-volume trade. The presence of these officials tells us this was not a chaotic bazaar, but a regulated economic zone, a precursor to modern commercial districts and trade fairs. The market's success was a direct result of the city's unique architecture. The same canals that prevented flooding and grew food also created the most efficient delivery system imaginable. This fluid mobility meant goods moved with minimal cost and effort, allowing prices to stay competitive and selection to remain vast. Tlatelolco became more than a market. It was a grand clearinghouse for an empire, a place where the agricultural bounty of the Chinampas met the mineral wealth of the mountains and the artisanal crafts of 100 specialized neighborhoods. Its very existence, buzzing with life and wealth, was the ultimate proof that the Aztecs had not just built a city on water, they had built an economic powerhouse because of it. The very water that gave Tenochtitlan life also made it nearly unconquerable. Beyond its economic and spiritual roles, the city's design was a masterpiece of military foresight, transforming an entire lake into a dynamic, living fortress. The Aztec rulers understood that their greatest vulnerability, their island isolation, could be engineered into their most powerful asset. The vast expanse of Lake Texcoco was not merely a scenic backdrop, it was an impassable liquid wall. Any invading army from rival city-states would first have to cross miles of open water, a daunting task that exposed them completely and negated the advantages of superior numbers or heavy infantry. The lake forced every potential enemy to fight on Aztec terms, from the unstable footing of canoes and rafts, but the true genius of their defense lay in the control of access. The great stone causeways, those vital arteries of trade and connection, were engineered with a dual purpose. Their removable wooden bridges were not just for water flow, they were the linchpins of the city's security. In times of peace, the bridges lay flat, welcoming commerce and travelers. At the first sign of a military threat, however, defenders could quickly pull up the planks. In a matter of hours, the broad highways that linked Tenochtitlan to the world were severed, transformed into a series of disconnected stone piers ending in impassable gaps of water. Each causeway became a deadly funnel, a narrow corridor where an attacking force could be concentrated and cut down by arrows and spears from defenders on both sides. The city could effectively seal itself off from a land-based siege, sitting secure and supplied behind its aquatic walls. Yet isolation was only half the strategy. While an enemy was stuck at a broken bridge, the Aztec military enjoyed unparalleled mobility. Their fleet of war canoes, some large enough to carry dozens of warriors, could move rapidly across the lake's surface. Troops and supplies could be shifted from one threatened causeway to another with speed that a land-bound army could never match. This allowed for a flexible, reactive defense, meeting force with force wherever it appeared. More than just defenders, these canoes enabled offensive power. They could launch swift raids on enemy shorelines, intercept supply lines, or flank an army bogged down at a causeway's end. The lake was their highway, their moat, and their strategic high ground all at once. For generations, this system made Tenochtitlan impregnable, allowing the Aztec state to project power across the valley without fear of a direct strike at its heart. It was the ultimate expression of defensive urban planning, where every element of daily infrastructure doubled as a component of national security. The city did not just have defenses, it was a defense engineered from the ground, or rather the water, up. This brilliant design fostered a sense of invincibility, a belief that their home was ordained by the gods and secured by human genius. Yet the very features that made the city so strong would, in its final chapter, become the blueprint for its downfall, revealing a fatal paradox hidden within its perfect walls. This profound integration of defense and daily life points to a deeper truth about Tenochtitlan. The city was not merely a place to live, it was a living prayer, a physical manifestation of the Aztec universe. Every stone, every canal was placed with a dual intention, serving both practical need and profound cosmological symbolism. The entire metropolis was designed as a sacred diagram, a mirror of the cosmos made tangible on Earth. At its absolute center stood the Templo, the twin pyramid temple. This was far more than a site for ceremony. It represented the sacred mountain of Coatepec, the mythic birthplace of the Aztec patron god Huitzilopochtli. In their worldview, this temple was the axis mundi, the central axis connecting the earthly realm to the heavens above and the underworld below. It was the pivot point of all existence, and the entire city radiated out from this spiritual epicenter. This symbolic mapping extended into the very streets and waterways. The four great causeways that stretched toward the mainland were not aligned for mere convenience. They were deliberately oriented to the four cardinal directions, dividing the island city into four distinct quarters. Each quarter corresponded to one of the four cosmic divisions of the Aztec universe and was further associated with a specific deity, a color, and an elemental force. Moving from the market in Tlatelolco to a temple in a different district was not just a physical journey, it was a passage through a symbolic landscape, a walk across a model of the cosmos. Even the challenging environment that surrounded them was woven into this sacred geography. The vast, encircling waters of Lake Texcoco were not seen as a mere geographical feature. They were intimately linked to the primordial waters of creation, the chaotic, life-giving soup from which the world first emerged. The Chinampas, those fertile floating gardens, were thus more than farmland. They were symbols of creation itself, patches of ordered life rising from the ancient, nurturing waters. This belief infused every act of construction with spiritual weight. Digging a canal was not just civil engineering, it was ritually aligning a terrestrial vein with celestial patterns. Driving a basalt log into the lakebed was an act of cosmic anchoring. The engineers and laborers were not simply builders, they were participants in a continuous ritual to maintain the balance of the universe. The city's physical stability was utterly intertwined with its spiritual purpose. A well-maintained causeway ensured the flow of people and goods, but it also upheld the cosmic order along that sacred direction. A functioning aqueduct delivered life-giving water, but it also channeled the essence of the sacred springs into the heart of their world. This fusion meant that pragmatic failure could be interpreted as spiritual imbalance and vice versa. To care for the city's infrastructure was to care for the cosmos itself. In Tenochtitlan, there was no separation between the sacred and the practical. The mathematics of engineering and the poetry of belief were one and the same, a unified language spoken in stone and water, all designed to keep their world, both physical and divine, in perfect, harmonious balance. The marvel of Tenochtitlan was a delicate equilibrium, a perfect tension between earth and water. Its collapse was not a sudden explosion, but a slow, quiet suffocation, a tragedy of misunderstanding that began the moment the old ways were declared obsolete. The Spanish victors, gazing upon the conquered city, saw not a symbiotic masterpiece but a problem to be fixed. They were terrified of the seasonal floods and deeply uncomfortable with a landscape where streets were made of water. Their vision was for a familiar European city of solid ground, grand plazas, and wheeled carriages, so they embarked on a campaign that seemed like progress, but was in fact a profound act of hydrological violence. They systematically dismantled the very systems that kept the city alive. The great Tlatelolco Dike, that 16-kilometer guardian against saltwater and storms, was broken apart. The intricate network of canals, the city's lifeblood and circulatory system, was viewed as primitive waterways to be filled in with rubble and soil, paved over to create more dry land for building. They severed the aqueducts and disrupted the careful flow that sustained the Chinampas. In their zeal to conquer the lake, they failed to understand they were killing the city that the lake upheld. The immediate consequences were ecological chaos. Without the dike, saline waters rushed back into the basin, poisoning the remaining freshwater sources and ruining the agricultural land that fed the population. The brilliant drainage and flood control mechanisms were gone, so when the rains came, the water had nowhere to go. What was once a managed aquatic landscape became a stagnant, flood-prone swamp. But the most insidious damage was hidden, happening silently beneath their feet. The ancient Aztec foundation relied on a critical principle, the buoyant support of the water-saturated soil. Think of the lakebed like a wet sponge. When you press down on a sponge floating in water, it compresses only slightly, supported by the liquid around it. This is how Tenochtitlan's heavy structures remained stable for centuries. The Spanish, by draining the water, were essentially wringing out the sponge. They removed the very element that provided lift and stability. Then they compounded the disaster by building their own massive structures, cathedrals and palaces of quarried stone far heavier than the lighter volcanic rock and wood of Aztec architecture. This immense new weight now bore down on the compacting, dew-watered sponge of the lakebed. The city began to sink. It was a slow, relentless process, measured in centimeters per year at first, but accumulating over decades and centuries into a crisis. This was the ultimate tragic irony. The conquerors, believing they were applying superior European engineering, had completely misdiagnosed the situation. They saw water as the enemy to be expelled when it had always been the essential partner. In their attempt to improve the city by making it more like home, they initiated a geological chain reaction from which it could never recover. The subsidence they triggered was not a natural fate, but a direct result of this hydraulic folly. It created a problem so permanent and profound that modern Mexico City, built atop the ruins, still battles its consequences today, spending billions to pump water back into the aquifers and shore up tilting monuments. The silent collapse of Tenochtitlan teaches us a harsh lesson that the most advanced technology is worthless without the wisdom to understand the system it seeks to replace. The ghost of the lakebed never truly left. Modern Mexico City rests upon the ancient foundation of Tenochtitlan, and it is engaged in a slow, silent battle with the ground beneath it. The metropolis is sinking, a process geologists call subsidence, and in some areas it drops by as much as 20 inches every single year. This is not a mysterious act of nature, but the direct, inevitable consequence of the choices made centuries ago when the Spanish began draining the lake. That original act of hydrological disruption set in motion a chain reaction that modern engineers are still struggling to contain. By severing the city from the water that buoyed it, they turned the stable, saturated sponge of the lakebed into a compacting layer of clay and sediment, slowly collapsing under its own weight and the immense pressure of a modern megacity. But the crisis was accelerated exponentially by the 20th century's thirst. To supply a population that now numbers in the millions, the city began pumping vast quantities of water from the underground aquifers, the very same reservoirs that were once replenished by the lake. Think of the aquifer as a giant, subterranean water mattress supporting the layers of earth above. As the water is pumped out, the mattress deflates and everything on top sinks downward. The ancient basalt logs and engineered clay layers of Tenochtitlan are now buried deep beneath this settling mass, compressed under millions of tons of modern concrete and steel. They are a testament to a forgotten logic, still present but unable to function as intended in a world that removed their essential partner, the water. This relentless sinking presents a continuous, visible engineering crisis. Nowhere is it more dramatic than at the heart of the historic center, at the Metropolitan Cathedral. Built by the Spanish using stones from the dismantled Templo Mayor, this monumental church now lists and tilts with an alarming lean. Its grand facade is a warped canvas of cracks and uneven doorways, a physical record of the ground's slow-motion collapse. Stabilizing it has become a decades-long project of modern ingenuity confronting ancient geology. Engineers have drilled deep beneath the cathedral's foundations to inject grout and compact the soil, and they have installed a sophisticated system of adjustable supports to manually level the structure as it continues to shift. It is a constant, costly vigil, a fight against a force set in motion 500 years ago. Across the city, the effects are pervasive. Water and gas pipes fracture, sidewalks buckle, and building foundations crack under the uneven stress. The modern city must spend billions on infrastructure repairs and pumping systems, all to manage a problem that the original city never had. This ongoing struggle underscores with painful clarity the sheer brilliance of the original Aztec system. Their city did not fight the lake, it integrated with it. Their foundations were designed for a water-rich environment, using the lake's buoyancy as a structural asset. We are now witnessing in real time the cost of ignoring that deep environmental wisdom. The ghost of Tenochtitlan dictates terms from below, a persistent reminder that the most advanced engineering is futile if it misunderstands the fundamental nature of the ground upon which it builds. The sinking city stands as a monument to a profound truth, that sometimes the most resilient foundation is not the one that resists the environment, but the one that learns to float within it. The proof of their genius lies buried, waiting in the dark, For centuries, the true scale of Tenochtitlan's foundation was a matter of speculation, hinted at in Spanish chronicles but invisible beneath the modern metropolis. Then the city's own growth began to reveal its deepest secrets. Every time engineers dig a new subway tunnel or archaeologists carefully excavate around the historic center, they encounter the silent, stubborn witnesses of the past, the basalt logs themselves. These discoveries are not dramatic treasure troves of gold, but something far more valuable to understanding the city's soul, the physical evidence of its battle with the earth. During the construction of Mexico City's extensive subway system, workers cutting through the ancient lakebed repeatedly struck these dense volcanic columns. Far from being an obstacle, each find became a moment of frozen time, a direct encounter with the hands that placed them there 500 years ago. The logs were found exactly as described, driven vertically into the compacted clay, often still in the precise grid patterns that once distributed the weight of a vanished city. These accidental finds prompted systematic investigation. Archaeologists armed with new technologies began to listen to the ground without ever breaking its surface. Using ground-penetrating radar, they sent pulses of energy into the earth, creating sonic maps of the subterranean world. The returning signals painted a stunning picture, revealing vast, ghostly grids of buried stone stretching far beyond any single excavation site. To confirm these images, they used core sampling, drilling narrow, deep tubes into the soil. When pulled up, these cores brought back stratified history, layers of modern debris, colonial fill, and then, unmistakably, the compacted layers of volcanic rubble and clay that surrounded the tips of the basalt pilings. Each sample was like reading a page from a geological diary, recording the precise composition of the engineered foundation. Perhaps the most telling discoveries came from meticulous digs at the sacred center, near the Templo Mayor. Here, in the waterlogged soil, conditions were perfect for preserving materials that normally decay. Alongside the expected basalt logs, archaeologists found wooden stakes, their shapes still distinct after centuries in the anaerobic mud. This was a crucial piece of the puzzle. It suggests the builders used temporary wooden frameworks to guide and position the heavier stone columns, a sophisticated technique that combined different materials for precision. Every artifact, from a massive basalt log to a humble wooden stake, adds a specific detail to our understanding. They allow us to reverse engineer the process, to move from vague admiration to concrete comprehension. We can now trace the likely steps from quarrying and transport on reed barges to the communal effort of driving them into the soft lakebed using gravity, leverage, and immense coordinated force. These silent stones are more than relics, they are the ultimate testimony. They confirm that the astonishing descriptions from the Spanish conquerors were not exaggerations, but understated accounts of what they barely understood. The basalt logs, resting in museum cases or documented in archaeological reports, are the tangible proof of a logic that defied conventional wisdom. They whisper from the depths that the city's greatest strength was never its glittering temples, but this hidden, intelligent grip on the earth below, a grip we are only now beginning to fully measure and appreciate. The world offers other examples of cities built in defiance of water, but none quite like Tenochtitlan. The most famous comparison is Venice, the Italian city of canals that rose from a lagoon in the Adriatic Sea. Both cities are marvels of hydraulic engineering, yet their foundational philosophies reflect vastly different environments and materials. Venice was built by driving thousands of wooden piles, primarily alder and oak, into the soft mud of its lagoon. The constant submersion in salt water petrified the wood over centuries, creating a surprisingly stable, if organic, foundation for stone palaces above. Tenochtitlan, by contrast, was anchored with the unyielding mineral strength of volcanic basalt in a high-altitude freshwater lake. The scale of the Aztec capital also sets it apart. At its zenith in the early 16th century, Tenochtitlan was home to an estimated 200,000 people, a staggering density that made it one of the largest cities on Earth. Venice during the same period, while wealthy and powerful, housed perhaps half that number. This population difference speaks to Tenochtitlan's unique, self-sustaining core, the Chinampas. Venice was a commercial powerhouse reliant on trade across the sea for its sustenance, a glittering island of merchants. Tenochtitlan was an agricultural and hydraulic powerhouse, feeding its massive population from the very lake it was built upon, a self-reliant island of farmers and engineers. Both are testaments to human ingenuity, but they solved the problem of water from opposite directions. Venice mastered the art of living with the sea as a conduit for commerce, while Tenochtitlan mastered the art of living from the lake as a source of life itself. Beyond these two giants, other cultures have forged their own delicate truces with aquatic worlds. High in the Andes, on the vast, cold expanse of Lake Titicaca, the Yoros people have maintained a way of life for centuries by building floating islands from the totora reed. These are not anchored foundations, but buoyant platforms constantly renewed by layering fresh reeds on top as the old ones decay beneath. The Yoros' adaptation is one of incredible lightness and mobility, a literal floating existence that can be moved if necessary. It is a brilliant response to a different set of challenges, but it lacks the permanent urban scale and complex infrastructure of Tenochtitlan. The Aztec achievement stands apart not merely for building on water, but for building a vast, stone-based metropolis that integrated every facet of civilization into a single, cohesive hydrological system. Their city combined intensive agriculture, sophisticated waste recycling, managed freshwater delivery, flood control, military defense, and cosmic symbolism into one interconnected whole. The canals were not just for transport, they were the veins of this living system. The Chinampas were not just farms, they were the metabolic engines. The dikes and causeways were not just walls and roads, they were instruments of environmental balance. This holistic vision may be unparalleled in human history. It presents a distinct model of adaptation, one that did not seek to dominate or merely survive a challenging environment, but to engage with it in a continuous, creative partnership. Where Venice showcases maritime commerce and the Yoros demonstrate resilient mobility, Tenochtitlan offers a breathtaking vision of a truly integrated aquatic civilization, a reminder that the most profound engineering is often that which weaves human society seamlessly into the fabric of the natural world. The stone they chose was as much a part of their story as the city itself. To understand the foundation of Tenochtitlan, we must look closer at its most essential ingredient, the dark, unyielding rock known as basalt. This was not a random choice from the landscape, but a deliberate selection based on properties that the Aztec builders clearly understood through long observation and experience. Basalt is an igneous rock born from fire. It forms when lava from a volcanic eruption cools rapidly on the Earth's surface. This rapid cooling creates a fine-grained, dense structure with minimal pores or gaps. The result is a material of immense toughness, possessing what geologists call high compressive strength, meaning it can bear enormous weight without cracking or crumbling. In the demanding environment of a lakebed, where constant moisture and shifting soils would degrade softer stones, basalt's natural resistance to weathering and water erosion made it the perfect mineral ally. It was a rock built to endure the very challenges the lake presented. Nature itself provided a convenient form for this perfect material. In many volcanic regions, including the Valley of Mexico, basalt exhibits a fascinating geological feature called columnar jointing. As a thick lava flow cools, it contracts, sometimes fracturing into a network of polygonal columns that can look remarkably like a bundle of stone logs or pencils. While the Aztecs certainly quarried and shaped basalt, the prevalence of these natural columnar formations in the local landscape would have presented them with a ready-made template, a suggestion from the earth itself on how to use this formidable stone. The valley's volcanic history meant basalt was abundant and accessible, a local resource that eliminated the need to import a foundational material from distant, possibly hostile territories. The selection of basalt over other available stones, like the softer, more workable limestone, reveals a sophisticated, practical intelligence. Limestone might have been easier to cut and carve for decorative purposes, and the Aztecs did use it for sculptures and finer details. But for the hidden work, for the deep pilings and the core of their pyramids, they needed brute strength and permanence. Choosing basalt for these critical, load-bearing roles was a materially optimal decision. It demonstrates an empirical knowledge gained through generations of experimentation, a form of ancient materials engineering. They learned which stone could be trusted to hold the weight of a temple for centuries in wet ground, and which would eventually turn to powder. This was not just convenience, it was a deep, practical wisdom about the physical world. Their choice ensured the longevity of their constructions, a legacy we can still touch today in the surviving fragments of their city. In every basalt log, we see the convergence of geological fortune and human insight, a partnership between a resilient land and a people who learned how to read its strength. The dark basalt logs did not move themselves, the perfectly aligned canals were not dug by magic, and the vast dike did not rise from the lakebed by wish alone. Every ton of stone, every basket of earth, every woven willow fence in Tenochtitlan was placed there by human hands, an army of laborers whose names are lost to history, but whose collective effort remains etched into the landscape. This was a miracle of social organization as much as it was of engineering, a system that mobilized thousands into a single, purposeful force. At the heart of this mobilization was a practice known as the coatquittal. This was not slavery in the traditional sense, but a mandatory form of labor tribute owed to the Aztec state by its conquered and allied territories. When the ruler or the engineering priesthood decreed a new project, a call would go out across the empire. Communities were required to send rotating crews of workers for designated periods, providing the raw human power needed to move mountains, or in this case, to build a city where a mountain could not stand. It was a tax paid not in gold or maize, but in sweat and time. The workforce was a tapestry of specialized skills. There were the stonemasons who could read the grain of volcanic rock, shaping it with harder stone tools and abrasives. There were the canoe makers crafting the essential vessels from hollowed-out logs, surveyors using simple but effective tools like sighting poles and measured cords, laid out the precise grids for canals and foundations. Then there were the countless unnamed laborers, the men and women who dredged mud, hauled baskets of rubble, wove the massive reed mats for dikes, and pulled the ropes that guided basalt logs into place. The coordination was as impressive as the construction. Feeding, housing, and directing such a vast, rotating population required meticulous logistics. Work was likely organized in shifts, with crews arriving from different regions, working for a set span, and then returning home as another group took their place. This created a continuous, rolling wave of labor that could sustain projects over decades. Directing this human river was a small, elite class of individuals who combined the roles of priest, mathematician, and engineer. These were the keepers of sacred knowledge, men who understood the movements of the stars for ritual calendars, the principles of geometry for aligning causeways to the cardinal directions, and the behavior of water for predicting floods. Their authority was spiritual and practical, guiding the work with a vision that connected cosmic order to the placement of every stone. The sheer scale of the endeavor is difficult to grasp. To build the Nezahualcoyotl dike alone, stretching over 10 miles, required the movement of millions of cubic feet of earth and stone, all by hand. The human cost of such megaprojects in terms of exertion, time spent away from family, and the physical toll of such relentless work was undoubtedly immense. It was a burden borne by many for the glory and stability of the imperial center. Yet, to see this only as forced labor misses a deeper layer. For many participants, especially those from the core Aztec communities, this work was also an act of profound collective purpose. They were not just moving dirt, they were participating in the literal construction of their world, a sacred duty to maintain the balance between humanity and the gods. The city that rose from the lake was a testament to what becomes possible when human effort is coordinated with a single, unifying vision, whether that vision was imposed by an emperor or embraced as a shared destiny. It stands as a reminder that the greatest monuments are never just about stone and water, but about the immense, coordinated will of the people who believed in them enough to build the impossible. Even the most stable climate holds its breath. The Aztec city flourished during a relatively calm period in the valley's environmental history, but the land itself kept a different record. High in the surrounding mountains, ancient trees silently chronicled the passing centuries in their growth rings. Modern scientists studying these arboreal archives have uncovered a story of subtle tension. The data reveals cycles of prolonged drought, years where the rains failed and the vast expanse of Lake Texcoco would have shrunk, its shoreline receding and exposing the muddy edges of the city. Conversely, the rings also tell of periods of deluge, when relentless storms would have sent torrents of water down from the mountains, threatening to overtop the canals and submerge the Chinampas. Tenochtitlan was not built in a static paradise, but in a dynamic, sometimes volatile, dialogue with the skies. This environmental variability was not a distant threat, it was a daily reality woven into the city's very design. The genius of their infrastructure lay in its inherent flexibility, its ability to absorb these climatic shocks rather than rigidly resist them. During a drought, the Chinampa system demonstrated a remarkable resilience. Because each garden plot was surrounded by water channels and its roots were constantly fed by capillary action from below, the crops were buffered against dry spells that would have devastated conventional field agriculture on the mainland. The lake itself, though lower, still provided a moisture reservoir that kept the system alive. The city's dependency was on the water table, not just on surface rain, giving it a crucial buffer. In times of excessive rain, their adaptive technologies swung into a different role. The Great Nezahualcoyotl Dike acted as a massive shock absorber, holding back storm surges and protecting the freshwater basin where the city sat. The network of canals, far from being overwhelmed, became a distributive system, channeling the floodwaters away from critical areas and allowing them to slowly dissipate across the managed landscape. The raised causeways kept vital land routes open even as water levels rose around them. This was not a fight against nature, but a dance with its rhythms. A conventional land-based city of that era, built on solid ground, might have been safe from lake floods, but it would have been utterly vulnerable to the droughts, its fields parched and its people hungry. Tenochtitlan's aquatic design created a unique form of climate resilience. It was a system that could expand and contract with the environment, using the lake's own capacity to moderate extremes. The city thrived not in spite of the changing climate, but because its architecture was an extension of that very change, a lesson in dynamic stability that feels urgently modern. As our own world grapples with rising seas and unpredictable weather, the ghost of this floating city offers a profound insight. True resilience may not come from building higher walls against the water, but from designing communities that can float, flex, and adapt within it, using natural systems not as enemies to be conquered, but as partners in our enduring survival. The idea of a city that truly floated is a beautiful fiction. When we picture Tenochtitlan, our minds often conjure an image of islands and temples hovering on the water's surface, detached from the earth below. This vision is not entirely wrong, but it misses the deeper, more fascinating truth. The floating sensation came from the Chinampas in their earliest stage. A newly built garden plot, a buoyant raft of woven reeds and dredged mud, would indeed bob gently on the lake for a short time, but this was a temporary, transitional state. Within a single growing season, the fast-growing willow trees planted at its corners would send roots shooting down through the layered soil, piercing the woven enclosure and driving deep into the firm lakebed. The floating garden became a rooted island, a permanent extension of the earth. The city itself, with its stone temples and paved plazas, was never floating. It was meticulously anchored. The Spanish who first saw it from a distance, however, were witnessing something their European experience could not easily categorize. They saw a vast urban landscape where the lines between land and water were constantly blurred, where canals were streets and entire neighborhoods appeared to sit upon the shimmering plain of the lake. Their awestruck reports, describing a vision from a book of legends, naturally leaned into the language of magic and mirage. They spoke of a floating city because no other phrase in their vocabulary could capture the breathtaking, disorienting reality before them. This poetic description was then amplified over centuries by romantic paintings and later retellings, solidifying the myth in popular culture. Yet the Aztecs' own records, the pictorial codices painted on bark paper, tell a more grounded story. They show the process of building Chinampas and driving pilings, depicting a city under construction, not a phantom on the water. The enduring power of the floating metaphor lies in the emotional truth it conveys. It perfectly captures the city's profound and visible connection to its aquatic world, an integration so complete it seemed to defy the very laws of physics. But the factual reality is, in an engineering sense, far more remarkable. Building a metropolis that appears to float is a fantasy. Building one that could withstand centuries on a reinforced swamp, that could distribute the weight of pyramids across a grid of sunken stone, and that could manage the constant push and pull of a living lake, that is a triumph of human intellect. The myth speaks to our wonder, but the anchored truth speaks to their genius. Tenochtitlan's silent stones speak directly to our own uncertain future. As 21st century cities confront rising seas, sinking ground, and extreme weather, the ancient capital offers not a blueprint to copy, but a philosophy to reclaim. Its core lesson is a shift in perspective, from seeing water as a threat to be walled away to recognizing it as a partner to be integrated. Modern urban planning often rigidly separates functions, but this city wove them together into a resilient whole. Its canals were transportation, drainage, and community boundaries. Its Chinampas were food production, water filtration, and flood mitigation. This integration of what we now call blue and green infrastructure created a system where every element served multiple, reinforcing purposes, a model of efficiency we are only beginning to reimagine today. Consider the critical issue of waste. Our linear systems extract, consume, and discard, creating mountains of landfill and polluted waterways. Tenochtitlan operated on a circular logic, where organic waste was not a problem but a resource, completing a vital nutrient loop back to the farmland that fed the city. Modern initiatives in urban composting and wastewater recycling are, in essence, striving to rebuild this ancient understanding that a city's health depends on closing its metabolic loops. Similarly, the Aztec reliance on local, durable basalt minimized the environmental cost of transport and ensured longevity. This principle of using locally sourced, resilient materials is a cornerstone of contemporary sustainable design, reducing carbon footprints and creating structures built to last. Perhaps the most urgent lesson lies in the principle of dynamic adaptation. Modern engineering often seeks to impose static, permanent solutions on dynamic natural systems. The Aztecs, by contrast, designed for flexibility. Their causeways with removable bridges managed both daily water flow and wartime defense. Their dikes managed salinity and storm surges. They accepted that the lake's level would change, and they built a city that could accommodate that change, rather than one that would fight it to the death. For coastal cities today, this suggests a move away from sheer seawalls and toward living shorelines, permeable barriers, and amphibious architecture that can accommodate fluctuating water levels. The city challenges the arrogant notion that older solutions are primitive. Tenochtitlan sustained a density of 200,000 people with a sophisticated, low-carbon footprint, producing much of its own food and managing its own water within a closed basin. It stands as a powerful case study in high-density, sustainable urban living that was centuries ahead of its time. Its eventual collapse was not due to a failure of its original design, but to a foreign system that misunderstood and dismantled its ecological logic. This is a cautionary tale about the danger of discarding deep, place-based knowledge in the name of progress. For planners envisioning the cities of tomorrow, whether floating neighborhoods or climate-resilient districts, the question is not how to replicate basalt logs, but how to replicate the mindset that placed them there. It is a mindset that asks, how can we design with nature rather than against it? How can our infrastructure perform multiple, symbiotic roles? How can we create circular systems where nothing is wasted? The ghost of the floating city, anchored firmly in wisdom, reminds us that the most advanced urban future may look less like a fortress of steel and concrete, and more like a resilient, ever-adapting partnership with the world we inhabit. The true depth of their achievement is measured by the questions we still cannot fully answer. For all our modern tools and understanding, the builders of Tenochtitlan left behind a series of elegant puzzles, their precise methods obscured by time and the weight of a modern city built atop their work. Take something as fundamental as the mortar that bound their stones. In a perpetually damp environment, ordinary lime mortar would have weakened and crumbled. Yet the structures that remain show a binder of remarkable durability. Archaeologists and materials scientists are still analyzing microscopic samples, searching for the exact recipe. Did they incorporate local volcanic ash, creating a primitive form of concrete that could cure underwater? Or was there a specific organic additive, a plant resin or gum, that gave the mixture its water-resistant property? The secret of this glue, which held a civilization together, remains locked in the chemistry of a few surviving fragments. The placement of the basalt logs presents another enigma of silent coordination. How did teams working in murky lake water without modern sightlines ensure that hundreds of these multi-ton columns were driven perfectly vertical and aligned into a precise, load-bearing grid? The use of temporary wooden frames, as suggested by preserved stakes, is part of the answer, but the initial surveying, the establishing of that first master alignment across the unstable lakebed, hints at a sophisticated technical knowledge. Some researchers have proposed the use of simple but effective water levels, using the principle that water seeks its own level to create a horizontal reference plane across great distances. Others speculate about the possible use of lodestones, naturally magnetized pieces of ore, to find cardinal directions with surprising accuracy. The truth likely involves a combination of ingenious low-tech tools, a deep familiarity with their environment, and a procedural rigor passed down through generations of master builders. This extends to the grand urban plan itself. The breathtaking symmetry of the canal grid and the precise orientation of the causeways to the cardinal points did not happen by chance. It required a consistent surveying technique that could be replicated over decades of expansion. How did they translate a cosmic diagram, a sacred map of the universe, into the muddy reality of a lakeshore? They may have used measured chords, sighting poles, and astronomical markers, aligning major avenues with the rising sun on a solstice. each act of measurement was also a ritual, blending geometry with cosmology. The lingering mystery is not whether they could do it, but exactly how they achieved such consistency of scale and alignment without the written mathematical texts we rely on today. These unanswered questions are not failures of our research, but invitations. They are what transformed Tenochtitlan from a closed chapter of history into a living, collaborative frontier. Archaeologists now work alongside civil engineers who understand soil mechanics, with hydrologists who model ancient water flow, and with materials scientists who can decode the atomic structure of a 500-year-old mortar sample. Each new subway tunnel excavation or infrastructure project in Mexico City is monitored with anticipation, a chance that the ground might yield another clue. The city's greatest secrets are not gold or treasure, but data points, a piece of worked wood, a stain in the soil that reveals a post hole, a curious alignment of stones in a core sample. These fragments are the pieces of a magnificent engineering blueprint that we are still patiently reconstructing. The genius of Tenochtitlan ensures it is never truly a relic of the past, but a persistent conversation between their ingenuity and our curiosity, a dialogue conducted in the quiet language of mud, stone, and enduring mystery. Tenochtitlan was a breathtaking reality, a testament to human ingenuity in the face of apparent impossibility. It was a city built not on a fantasy of floating islands, but on the hard-won wisdom of deep foundations and careful balance. From the basalt logs driven silently into the dark earth to the vibrant, life-giving Chinampas, the Aztec people engineered a harmonious existence with their aquatic world. They did not conquer the lake, they conversed with it, learning its rhythms and building a civilization that flowed with its tides. Their story is one of brilliant adaptation, where every canal served as a street, a boundary, and a vein in the city's living body. It is a story of holistic design where waste became fertilizer, where dikes managed both salt and storms, and where the placement of a stone was both a practical and a sacred act. This deep integration was their strength, a symphony of human need and environmental logic playing out across the waters of Lake Texcoco. Yet this is also a profound cautionary tale. The city's eventual fate speaks to the catastrophic consequences of misunderstanding such a delicate, interconnected system. When a new vision, blind to the old wisdom, sought to drain the lake and pave the canals, it did not improve the city, it broke its very heart. The ground, deprived of the water that gave it buoyancy, began its long, slow collapse. Today, as modern Mexico City continues to sink, tilting its grand cathedral, the ghost of the lake whispers urgent lessons. It reminds us that resilience is not found in rigid control, but in flexible partnership. It teaches that the most advanced engineering is not about defying nature, but about understanding our place within its systems. The silent basalt logs beneath the metropolis are more than archaeological curiosities. They are enduring questions. They ask us how we will build our own future. Will we impose our will upon the landscape, or will we learn to listen to it, to design with empathy and foresight? Let this ancient marvel inspire us to build with wisdom, with respect for the delicate balances that sustain all life, and with perhaps a little of that old defiance of conventional logic. For in the end, Tenochtitlan stands as a monument not to what was lost, but to what is possible when human creativity chooses to collaborate with the world rather than conquer it.